think that's a very important piece because especially as they get into teenage years, their job description as teenagers is to get away from you as a parent. They're growing away, they're separating from you. And if you don't have that communication, it makes it worse. You're just going to be in the dark completely, about their lives, because they will then really close up and you won't have access again. So I think parents need to be very intentional and make themselves available and accessible to their children as part of their parental duties.
Welcome to Early Intervention Matters, the podcast that helps parents, teachers, and health professionals understand the diagnosis, treatment, care, and support of children with autism, ADHD, Tourette's, and other neurodevelopmental challenges. Your host, Dr. Inyang Takon, is a consultant neurodevelopment pediatrician, and she will provide insight through interviews, answering questions, and breaking down complicated topics. By sharing stories from parents and professionals in the field, we hope to make sense of what can be an overwhelming topic. Early intervention is crucial with children with developmental difficulties. Yes, early intervention matters. And now, here's your host, Dr. Inyang Takon.
Hello, everyone. You're welcome to another edition of Early Intervention Matters podcast. And today we have a very important guest who is going to share lots of her knowledge and experience on a very important topic which we'll be talking about today called parenting. So just to introduce the podcast, this podcast hosts on all the major podcast platforms, but it is Early Intervention Matters. We cover a range of topics, neurodevelopmental topics affecting young people into younger adults, but it also provides information. We regularly get guests on the shows, and we hope that you will enjoy this session today. So I'm really pleased to have Dr. Oshodi, Dr. Yewande Oshodi, joining us today. Welcome, Dr. Oshodi.
Thank you very much. I am really pleased to be here with you, Dr. Inyang Takon. I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know you, in your very busy time, we're really pleased that you could have time to join us. So I'll just introduce Dr. Oshodi. Dr. Oshodi, I've known Dr. Oshodi for many, many years and just been pleased to see how her career has grown and spanned. She is an Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the College of Medicine, University of Lagos. She's also a consultant psychiatrist. Dr. Oshodi has over 25 years experience as a medical doctor, and she had her undergraduate education at the College of Medicine of the University of Lagos. So her specialist and subspecialist qualification were obtained from the National Postgraduate College, the Medical College, Faculty of Psychiatry, and also the College of Medicine of South Africa. So she did also have part of her study, especially study in South Africa. Dr. Oshodi holds a Master of Public Health from the University of Lagos, Nigeria, and she's also has a Master of Philosophy from the Stellenbosch University in South Africa in Cape Town. She has over 40 peer-reviewed research publications with emphasis on public mental health, and that's why we're so pleased we have her here today to benefit from her immense knowledge. She's done a lot for child and adolescent psychiatry along with women and infant mental health. She has also served in various leadership and senior hospital management capacity within the university and also the Lagos University Teaching Hospital. Dr. Oshodi is a public speaker. She's also a minister in the Covenant Nation. She's a marriage counselor and she enjoys mentoring younger colleagues and women in particular. So welcome, Dr. Oshodi. We are really pleased to have you, and we're definitely sure that we will benefit from your wealth of experience today.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Dr. Takon. I'm grateful, and well done for the great work you're doing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So first of all, I think just to start into for our guests, what led you into deciding that you wanted to be a child psychiatrist, first of all, and then a child psychiatrist?
I'll just say I kind of stumbled into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
When I finished medical school, I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be a surgeon. I didn't want to be a gynecologist. I didn't want to be all those, heroic things. I just felt it was going to be too tasking for a young, married, doctor. So I was left with a few options, and then I filtered through the options, and I ended up doing psychiatry, and the options, interestingly, were pediatrics, psychiatry, or public health. And hindsight 2020, I've kind of pretty much done everything of those three options.
Yes.
I ended up doing a master's in public health, specializing in psychiatry, and finally ended in child and adolescent psychiatry. So I think I had met all my dreams came true. So
I think we kind of mirror each other because I did pediatrics, but I always had this interest in psychiatry, and I also did a master's in public health from
oh, wow.
University of Lagos, the
Wow.
thesis where you studied. So, and in the end, we've all kind of done the same thing in different ways.
Exactly.
I think that's why our interests kind of match, because we carry that public health knowledge and interested in sharing that information that we share in terms of educating and just sharing the knowledge that is.
I think the difference is you were more courageous than I to go and become a pediatrician. I just saw that pediatricians work so hard. I loved it, but it looked so hard work. I just felt, would I be able to cope? I loved it. So I said, okay, I'll do psychiatry. And then I ended with child and adolescent psychiatry.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, our conversation today is on parenting, and I think that this conversation is quite interesting one because we've got parents across different domains and spectrums. So we've got, and this podcast is going out all over the world, so people listen to it from all continents. So, and there will be people who have remained where they have been and been parents and mirror what they learned as growing up. But there will also be people who have moved across continents and having to adapt to new ways, where you've moved with young family, adapting to new ways of having to parent children and just trying to learn across board. So for example, myself, I lived in Nigeria and in West Africa, where I had my undergraduate and postgraduate training before coming over to the United Kingdom. And I had my first child there. But parenting for me was different because I witnessed what I grew up with and learned, and saw similar patterns across our spheres and communities. And then having to travel down to the United Kingdom, where my kids have lived the better part of their lives, and had my second daughter here. It's been a learning curve and a learning phase, understanding parenting as well. So I think that this conversation is going to be very important because, sometimes it can be really challenging for some families, in terms of what the challenges of day to day and the challenges of having to parent your children can be challenging. So we hope we'll be able to really talk more about that. I don't know what your view is with what I've just said in terms of, those challenges. Is this something that you feel has been?
I think the issue of parenting and doing it right is what I'll call something that is of public health significance. And when we think about the public health issues and public health things that need to be addressed, I'm not sure the role of parenting stands out, important enough for people to see. Because once it is done right, it can, have such impact to long-term well-being of the children and adolescents being raised. But then when it's done wrong, it does have mental health consequences. And this is me speaking as a child and adolescent psychiatrist with public health interest. So it becomes of public health significance, helping people to understand how important parenting is. And I do agree with you that, the setting in which we find ourselves kind of influence how it is done. And there are certain strengths and shortcomings in, different settings. But either way, good parenting can be universally achieved, if that makes sense, irrespective of where you are, irrespective of your cultural, coloration of it. I think good parenting can still be achieved. It shouldn't have to be an elusive thing. So there are some basic important building blocks around good parenting that can be replicated in different cultures. And I imagine we'll get to talk about some of those things as we go on.
Yeah.
Without me jumping the gun. Yes.
So, and just for, just for the audience, just as a starter, what would you describe as the expectations of the role of parents? I think if we start from there.
Well, first of all, being a parent is not just because you're the biological person that brought the person to the world. Not necessarily. It makes you a good parent. There are certain things you want to make available for the person you're parenting. You want to provide safety and care. You want to make sure the environment is enabling. You want to demonstrate empathy, and help the young person. When I say young person, I'm talking about children and adolescents, develop emotionally in an emotionally sound way. Of course, physical health is, also an important piece, and learn how to communicate appropriately. And I think as parents, we do it better than ourselves. At times, maybe some people are better at providing resources, but then they communicate and struggle with communication. Some may be better with showing care and empathy, but to an extreme where they become a bit too permissive. And, they leave out some of the other important bits that are important in parenting, like, structure, discipline, limit setting and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be a constellation of all these things together. A secure caring environment, consistent caregiving, support and provision for what the needs of the young person, what will foster emotional well-being and, healthy growth, and, communicating, properly while going along with that. I've seen parents who at times they're trying their best, but they're saying the wrong things, So every single piece seems to matter in trying to get parenting right, or at least improving upon your parenting skills, which I think most parents can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I like what you said that, there's several aspects, and sometimes, some people are better at doing one aspect than the other. Do you think the parents' own background sometimes influences the role they play? Because obviously in different communities, and I'm saying this as well because you've been able to walk across different communities and you would have observed different patterns. Do you feel that some parents have been accustomed to just doing some parts better based on their own parenting which they received? Because if we think about it, nobody really gives you the rule book of how to be a parent.
Exactly.
When you have
At times all you have are role models, things you've seen, and you try and, do it the same way. Yeah. So you're absolutely correct. There's no rule book for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. To answer your question, I do absolutely agree 100% that the way you were raised at times can influence the way you parent, and it can be for good or not. At times people have had the luxury of having, good parents raise them, or the luxury of being parented right. Let me rather frame it like that. And they do have an example that they can use as a guide. That, okay, this was how my mom handled it and all that. But at times, the parents that parented you did it their own best way, and they were trying to figure it out. And then if you then would just take it on and try and parent your children like that now, there may be gaps around them. For example, in Africa where we grew up, being the use of corporal punishment and physical punishment as part of parenting was commonplace. And of course, all the other things I've mentioned, things like making sure you are providing a safe home and all that, and secure environment and all that, those things may be there, but the corporal punishment, is it really helpful? Could that be done differently would be a gap. And if you now want to replicate that in your own parenting journey, it could end up being, you're actually harming the child. The other interesting thing I've seen that some parents try and do is, because they're trying so hard to not be like their parents, they also end up being deficient in how they're parenting their own child. So yes, your parents did some things not right, but then you're trying not to discipline your child or provide so much structure because your parents made your life a bit miserable because they were so, and then you then leave your children without providing any structure at all. That's also a negative because a child then grows up with no boundaries, no limits, cannot regulate themselves or self-regulate, and stuff like that may also be harmful to the children. So I think what good parenting looks like, maybe what we need to try and maybe describe or help people with.
I think you've touched on a very important point where some parents, and I've seen this in real life and in discussions with some people where they try to avoid the kind of upbringing they had, which they felt was very strict, and then I've seen that where they just allow the children, and like you said, I've seen that in many cases end up with negative consequences and for the child because then they do not have that structure and they do not have that so I think that you've raised that's a very important point for us to remember. I remember from my own background, my parents were strict. My mother was particularly strict, and we all grew up under that very strict boundaries and how she raised us. And initially we there were times when we used to think, well, why is she doing this? Are we not her children? And things like that. But on hindsight, we are very thankful. When we look at all, our journeys, we're very thankful that because the structures and boundaries were there, they have proven to be very beneficial to us. The ethics that we learned that were being built into us, we become very appreciative of it, and the fact that it's helped to shape us in the way we are. So this is very important, especially for parents when they move across cultures.
Yeah.
When you move across cultures, you find that you can sometimes, especially when your children are having peers, to adopt different practices. And just going back again, just looking at what challenges have you seen, especially from now we have a lot of movement across borders, across countries, and lots of people, say from Africa, moving to different countries. What are the challenges that you have seen, you know, with some of these, families? When you've spoken to them, when you've engaged with them, what are the challenges that they've had in fulfilling that role as parents?
Yeah. So thank you for that question because I mean it's almost like, okay, what is parenting looking like in some settings that may not be helpful? I want to start by thinking about what exactly is good parenting. It has to be very intentional, a very intentional assignment where you're aiming to help the child or to support the child or raise the child with warmth, consistency around certain limits, while also encouraging the child or adolescent to begin to acquire their own independence and, and individuation, and also thinking about their safety and well-being. So it's trying to achieve all of these tasks, being firm and consistent, but being warm and enabling, in a positive way and keeping them safe. So I'm thinking parenting as we're talking, I'm just thinking it's either you're doing it too much or you're doing it too little or you're doing it just right. So the problems come when you're doing it too much or too little. You're doing it, maybe you're being too rigid or too strict or too, hard or, or you're not being consistent. You're lacking in warmth and all of that. Too much, too little, or just right. So just right parenting will be somewhere in between where you're thinking about all these components, limit setting, warmth, consistency, safety, love, and all of that. So in like I said at the beginning, every culture has a picture of what good parenting can look like, even though our cultural backgrounds could be slightly different. However, I would say probably in African, settings, there may be a bit more coerciveness around the way some parenting is being done. Like we've spoken about the discipline and the strictness and all of that. Of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. It doesn't mean everyone, in Africa raises their kids like that. But then maybe in the West, in some settings, there's a bit more permissiveness. There's a lot of talk around, giving the child the opportunity to just, express themselves, which it's okay. But then when you are missing the other pieces of being consistent by the limits and stuff like that, that can also be a bad thing. So that's why I say it's either too much, too little, or we try and make it just right, irrespective of which culture we find ourselves. In the course of my work or career, I've seen the effects of poor parenting, both in Africa and in the West. I've seen it in both settings where the parental skills are lacking and the kids begin to reflect that in their emotional difficulty. Remember, I've spoken about you want to provide the child with emotional safety and help the child develop emotionally. For example, an example will be when you think about children that maybe they're struggling. They have things like tendencies for ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The parent is a bit overwhelmed, doesn't know how to parent this kid because it's already too tasking anyway. And just, let the child just be and have their way, do what they like. However, that child is going to become even harder to contain without structure or boundaries, around their lives. Or even a regular child that doesn't have, not necessarily having any neurodevelopmental disorder, but has learned to not understand the concept of delayed gratification. They get all they want when they want it, do what they like when they feel like it. What you do is you're raising a child that becomes very entitled, that either becomes very entitled, doesn't understand the concept of delaying gratification, wants things immediately, becomes an adult or a young person who just, lacks all the boundaries. And that flaw has begun from the parenting. And they then find parents trying to catch the bus late in the day by the time child is 15. They're not trying to, put rigid it's too late. Whereas if it had been done consistently early on, you may be helping the child to understand that life is about boundaries, things have time. You may need to wait a bit to get certain, stuff like that. I wonder if I'm clear with those examples.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. No, just you talked about it could be too little. Do you want to give an example of what?
When I say too
Just
little,
little.
it could be that, just permissive. You're not providing the limits, like I said, that's too little. Or you're not providing the warmth or the attachment that a child needs. Remember, I said we need to think about parenting as providing consistency, warmth, limits, helping the child achieve independence, self-reliance, helping them to be safe. So gaps around, just being available emotionally can also be a huge gap of parenting where a child then grows up and the attachment is fractured. Attachment is that thing, that emotional thing that it develops between a child or a person and a caregiver, a consistent caregiver. And we all have our attachment figures, and children and parents in particular, and their mothers, So an unavailable and is also not parenting well because attachment is then fractured. And all these deficits around parenting have long-term consequences around mental health and mental well-being of that child and adolescent and can be the precursor for mental health struggles. One more piece that could be too little can be around just being present, just being present in every sense of the word, not just, emotionally, but just knowing that my parents, I can count on them. They're consistent. They're available. They're there for me. That can also be a gap.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about communication. Communication featured, as one of the key things. And when I think back at some of the young people I've seen, both in Africa and here, I think communication is and it's two ways. It's the child being able to communicate with the parents and the parents actually providing that opportunity for the child to communicate. So would you want to talk more about this for our audience and why this is important? Because, things do go on in children's lives, and without, the right communication, that can be difficult.
Yeah. So some of us were raised, in settings where, you don't talk back. You can't talk back. But there's in some homes they have the saying children should be seen and not heard, so you just suck it in and don't say anything. Of course, these are things that deprive the child of the opportunity of expression and, connection with the parents. And the gap continues to grow. I mean, being a child psychiatrist myself and a parent, it's a piece that I keep trying to work on, so that you don't want to, being African, we have those structures of respect and all that, but at the same time, you don't want to alienate your children. You want them to be able to communicate with you, and you don't want to necessarily replicate how you were raised by parents that really did care for us. I mean, I was raised by a very loving family, but it was strict. There were certain things you don't talk back. When I was growing up, my kids try to talk back at times now, and I'm like, if you were being raised when I was raised, you dare not do that. But you want to make it that your children can open up to you, especially as they grow older. When they're younger, you're a bit, firm and distant and all of that. You may get away with it up to a certain point. But even when they're younger, you want them to be able to come to you. Especially they'll need that when they're struggling in some ways. But if we haven't provided that avenue where we're a bit more accessible than the rigid parenting that we experienced, or even if you didn't experience it, but you're just not mindful of the fact that you want your children to be able to speak to you. And I think what can help is you want to reassure them that I want you to know you can always talk to me. I want you to know I'm available. I want you to know that I'm not going to judge you if, no matter how bad it is, you need to be. I want you to feel free to tell me, whatever is going on with you. And I've had parents, say things like, no matter how bad it is, even if it is the worst thing that you think, I'm not going to, like, just tell me. I promise I'll keep it together and I will support you. So we want to provide that open access, as parents. That way the children won't need to hide things. That way, when they are struggling, maybe mental health wise or otherwise, they can let you know, and it's not after the fact that you're hearing it. Yeah, I think that's a very important piece, because especially as they get into teenage years, their job description as teenagers is to get away from you as a parent. They're growing away, they're separating from you. And if you don't have that communication, it makes it worse. You're just going to be in the dark completely, about their lives, because they will then really close up and you won't have access again. So I think parents need to be very intentional and make themselves available and accessible to their children as part of their parental duties.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's a very clear message that I hope our audience will listen to and can take on board. I think communication is one big, big, big thing. Once your children can trust you and they can communicate with you, then they would always tell you things. And also to that, as parents, I feel that we should try and be non-judgmental, because I think there's always a tendency that when the children start communicating, sometimes the parents start judging them.
Yeah,
Something.
so true. And at times, we may overreact and that makes them clam up.
Yeah.
We may, act in ways that they feel, okay, I'm never going to tell you again because the last time I told you this and this and this is what you did. So, and I know it can be tricky for parents, how does a child come and tell you they're up to no good? And you're just going to say, okay, thanks for telling me, so there's going to be that desire to want to say, no, you can't do that. It's not said that. But how do we do it? How can we do it or say it in a way that will achieve what we want to achieve without alienating them further? And one thing I found helpful also, and I tell parents to do as their kids begin to get into teenage years, is to also help the young person have other important adults in their lives. Important adults that are maybe closer in age to them, that can provide and reflect the same values you'd want to them, but can be like a default parent when your kid feels there's certain things that maybe you won't understand, or or they just want to hear from someone else. So if you can intentionally cultivate having that person in your child's life that can support them also. That it could be an auntie, it could be an older cousin, it could be, and that usually, helps. It's really in cultures that we have, a lot of extended families and stuff like that. Even where there are no extended families, there could be other important adults that can be involved in the child's life, and that may be very helpful, almost like a proxy to help support and parent, around, especially around tricky periods where they may not be opening up as much as you wish they would, and you also want to be very careful.
I think you've raised a very important point. And when I reflect on my own childhood as well, that's exactly what I had. I had another trusted adult who I could speak to when, sometimes I couldn't say things directly to my parents, my mother, who was very strict, but I had somebody I could, and that person was quite important in my life and also helped with guidance and advice, So I completely, agree with what you've said. So for families then, who probably have had that in the cultures where they were before and have moved across cultures, that can be difficult for them, because first of all, there's all the challenge of moving, adapting to new cultures. What would you recommend in terms of, the children finding that other,
Yeah.
you
For families that are migrants, that have uprooted themselves, right? Those are the ones yeah, I agree. It can be very tricky because the entire family is trying to just find their own space and, fit in. For every migrant group or migrant family, I think a sense of community is always very, very helpful. To kind of be connected to some community would be a very important task as you are settling as a migrant in a foreign setting. And at times, like religious, those that have religious meanings, that faith denominations that they belong to, at times that could be a useful community where there could be other people in the community that the young person, the parents and the young person connect with, and that those begin to represent surrogate uncles and aunties in the young person's life. That may be one strategy. The other piece could be, depending on the child's school and the age, adolescents or counselors could be a very important piece to engage the young person with in school, where they can receive support when things feel a bit difficult or they need to express themselves. So I think migrant families do struggle, and it can be very isolating for parents, talk less of for the young person who's at an age where connecting with peers is priority. It is the developmentally appropriate thing that they need to do. They want to make their own friends, but if it doesn't exist or the right group doesn't exist, it can be tricky. But parents being intentional, like we've said, and being mindful of how important these things are and trying to put some pieces in place to support around that could be a helpful strategy.
I think that's really good because one of the challenges, like you said, when they move, it can be very tasking. People can sometimes go into isolation and not really want to connect with other people. But actually, when you are raising children and it's really important. I think we can't overstress that community. Is finding a community that shares your values, but also integrating with the community where you are as well, because you've come into a new community. It's also very important to integrate with the community. You would also be able to find people who share your values in the new community and just helping to, build that. I think that's really important. Thank you. We've talked about the building blocks, why it's important to start very young. We've talked about what makes good parenting. And we do have the other side where, parents can sometimes be overprotective. Do you want to shed some more light on that? Because sometimes the fear of what may happen and all that could sometimes hinder parents from, allowing their young person, you know, um,
Yeah. Yeah, remember when I said you're either at times parents are either doing it too much or they're doing it too little. Yes, protect your child, make them safe and all of that. That's good. But at times being overprotective, being a helicopter parent where you're trying to micromanage everything, we're not allowing them find the chance to spread their own wings and fly. What we could be doing inadvertently, we're infantilizing them, making them remain, unable to connect or even learn from their own mistakes. At times, our young persons and our kids must make some mistakes. So we need to be mindful and ground that opportunity in a safe way. Of course, I'm saying, of course, you don't want a child about to drop off, a dangerous height, and you say, okay, I want you to learn from your mistake. That will be, irresponsibility. But within reason, you want them to experience things in a controlled way. For example, finances. We can start giving them some allowance, letting them, know what it's like to spend, to mismanage some of the resources with them and understand the consequences, helping them, some privileges. And when they misuse it, they should experience what the consequences of misusing it feels like in a loving and controlled setting. All these are important parts of parenting. So, I mean, we've not mentioned the word discipline, because discipline is part of parenting, but it should be done with the intention of helping the child to grow and develop ethics and values that will guide their life, going forward. As a parent, that you try your best, and at times the kids will learn some, they may not learn some, it's fine. But the thing is to offer them that safe environment to experience lessons that life can bring across their way, rather than overprotect them and bubble wrap them so that when life then happens, they don't have the capacity. So we need to let them grow. And I'm thinking of the different examples. They've never experienced hardship. They've never known how to, if they're supposed to do certain tasks to have benefits and they don't do the task, then they shouldn't get the benefits. That is some hardship. You're teaching them the lessons of life. But if every whim and caprice is just taken care of by you because you don't want them to feel any hardship, that is being overprotective. If every task they have in school, you're there and you've sorted it out for them, you're not letting them undergo the rigor of learning it, that is being overprotective. And you're not letting them, learn the lessons that will come with that experience. And I'm not sure we can give enough examples, because there are different ways this can show up in the course of parenting a child. But it's really just realizing that your job, particularly as the child gets into adolescence and begins to grow, is to give them the opportunity to learn some lessons about life, to learn some disciplines, to acquire values, and understand that there are consequences for certain behaviors, and certain things are privileges. And all those are important things that helps a child to become a well-rounded individual rather than an entitled, person who lacks control. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just to reframe some of the things we've been talking about after we defined what a good parenting is, we talked about the role of the parent and also trying our best to get it just right. We talked about how sometimes some aspects are provided better than the other by, some parents, but is actually trying to meet those key things we talked about. Providing warmth, nurturing environment, the communication, but also the part about, just the physical bit, but also making sure that you are helping that young person grow up to a well-rounded adult. And that also comes with challenges, because you don't have to overprotect them all the time. There should be aspects where they learn from their own mistakes, because sometimes trying to prevent every mistake, which naturally as parents you want to prevent them from falling, you want to be there, quickly solve the problem if anything goes wrong. And like you said, they don't learn, and that they can end up being adults who haven't learned from their mistakes, become self-entitled. They don't know how to handle challenges. They don't know how to face the world. They've never faced hardship before. And I think we can see some of this with young people when they grow up, when they've gotten to that stage where they really should be standing on their own. And you can see some young people struggling more than others in that situation. So just looking at it from another angle. So one of the things I've seen and I've heard from parents of young people is how when young people have reached a certain age, there's sometimes when parents have thought that they've done things right, sometimes young people blame the parents for things that happened across the way. They look back and think things were very harsh. Parents were harsh, and, they blame the parents for some of the experiences they've had. And sometimes it's quite difficult. Some of those parents have struggled to try to communicate to the young people the reason behind the kind of parenting they used in when managing the children. And sometimes you've seen this resentment and anger and upset from young people, which can be quite extreme in some cases. What is your advice? What would you say to parents facing those challenges? Because I've heard of it from not one, not two situations where young adults have, really felt that they were, not treated well by their parents, and they've had both that, including young adults that are doing well.
Yeah. I think it's a difficult place to be in for those parents, because difficult from the angle that you try to give your best to these children, and then they turn around and say those kind of hurtful things, or they interpret it in that way. Yeah, I can just imagine how painful it could be for parents who happen to be in that situation. It's going to be hard to undo the things that have been done, or to undo the way it has been perceived in that child or young person. But I think what those parents can do is to see how to build going forward. Yes, they're older adults now, and kids may take positions that could be very painful to the parent, but just being open and vulnerable to such a child and letting them know how sincerely you tried your best, is important, because don't forget that as they're children, they become young adults, they become adults. The way you handle and interact has to continue to become developmentally appropriate. You need to interact in that way with them. After a while, you cannot treat a 27-year-old the way you treat a 10-year-old. You need to be communicating at a higher level, at a more open level, maybe a bit more vulnerable with your own failings and your own struggles, and helping them understand why you did what you did, when you did it. And at times, outrightly just apologizing, for whatever hurt was caused knowingly or unknowingly. The other side, however, are parents that are coming up and are, parenting the way they think is best. I think it's also important to be open and vulnerable in a way that is age appropriate. Let your children understand why you're doing what you're doing. I think when we think about discipline and all of that, it cannot be seen as punishment. You need to help them understand that this is what's going to happen because of this. We're going to need to do this because of this. And you're reassuring. I want you to know that I love you very much. You're still, I'm your dad, I'm your father, I'm your mother. I'm doing this because I love you, because I want the best for you. But if I continue without doing it, I'm hurting you. What you're doing is you're helping that young person understand your intent, which at times it's not clear to them. So I think open communication is important, even when you need to be firm. If this happens, I'm going to have to take away this privilege. And the reason why I'm doing is because if I don't, I will be hurting you. You're also reassuring about your love, because what happens is, I think that the children or adolescents then begin to feel mommy doesn't care. She hates me. She's trying to make my life miserable. She's trying to just be mean and nasty. But when you're vulnerable and you say, let them know I do have these fears. This is why I'm having to do this, because I've seen this happen to other people. Oh, mom, you don't understand. I'm trying to, but just allow me to support you and parent you. I remember when my kids were getting into adolescence, and no young adulthood, maybe late teens into their early 20s. And you do know that the frontal lobes of adolescents are not well formed. They're going to make wrong choices. I had to tell them that, look, when I make these rules, it's because you probably will not be making right choices at times. And this is to guide you, just to give you some real guides for this season. As you get older, you make better choices. Allow these rules to work for you and to help you. I really try to break it down to them to help them understand that I am your mother and a psychiatrist, and I do understand certain things you don't, and I'm trying to help. That's why I'm saying this. Please let me help. And, it became a joke, when we talk about it. And I'm trying to help you. You look all grown, but you still need a bit more time for your brain to make the right choices, better choices,
Thank you, Dr. Oshodi. We've talked a lot about so many things, and thank you for all those very useful nuggets you've given to us. And we're sure our audience will have gotten a lot of practical information from this. We started off by saying that the consequences of not getting parenting right can end up in some mental health concerns. And for you as a psychiatrist, I think it would be really good to hear from you what kind of problems can occur as a from your perspective as a child psychiatrist. What kind of problems can occur as a result of not getting parenting right early on?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think we can talk from now till tomorrow, literally, because if we want to look at the role of parenting and child and adolescent mental health, parenting across the lifespan from infancy into early childhood, into school age children, into adolescence, gaps in parenting can affect the emotional well-being of these children across that lifespan. From infancy, you're talking about being available emotionally, developing of attachment, helping the child, be able to explore in a safe way while also keeping the child safe, issues around child protection, whether it's child abuse or domestic violence or, exposure to child sexual abuse or other kinds of abuse. Gaps in parenting could make children and adolescents vulnerable to these kinds of things. And of course, they have mental health consequences. Some children and adolescents have ongoing vulnerabilities. Maybe they have ADHD or ASD or some other, mental health difficulty, or maybe they're even depressed and the parent doesn't know. And they take it out that this child is just being difficult or disrespectful or lazy. And of course, rather than support the child who needs help, who needs good parenting, we take it out on the child and act in a way that is not helpful. I mean, when we go to school age children, they're in school, they're mixing with peers, they're getting to secondary school, they're experiencing bullying and exclusion and discrimination in school. And there's no access for them to come back and talk with you because there's no communication. There will be effects of that, that would affect the long-term well-being of the child. Or they're having mental health difficulties and they can't express it or ventilate, or you don't even get it because as a parent, you're not even mindful of this. Or the way in which we're disciplining, rather than discipline, we're punishing, we're reacting, and the reaction is in excess of the offense committed, or we're inconsistent in our discipline. Or we make threats. Oh, if you do this, I will never ever check what you're trying to achieve. You want to discipline a child, you need to think about it. At times, you even need the child's buy-in. Look, what are we going to do when you don't do this right? Can we do this? Can we do that? What are the consequences you're going to experience? Is that okay? And you plan it together, and the child works with you and begins to learn that, oh, there are consequences. And these consequences are not to hurt me. They're just to help me learn the right things. If you extend it into teenage years, late adolescence, there are things going on. Remember, we said that age they're trying to separate from you. On a good day, they don't want you in their business. But at the same time, they need you as their parents. So how do we make ourselves still be approachable to them as they're, advancing into adulthood, and be supportive and grant them some level of autonomy that they require as they're, venturing into this stage of their lives. So how we manage our role as parents in the course of the lives of our children and adolescents can make or mar their mental well-being. And I think just being aware of that as parents is a good place to start from, and beginning to learn how to maybe parent better. Because I want to think most parents are trying to do it the best way they can, but there's always a better. There's always a way of doing it better. And I think that's a task to any parent listening to this. Is there a better to what I'm doing? Is there a better to how I'm parenting? And to explore that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oshodi. And just to finalize, I think your last statements really summarized the tips for parents and the implications of getting it right from the start. For parents who are out there thinking, oh, I wish I knew this when I started, or new parents who are just starting, or parents who have parented and have, gone through the crashes and the lows of parenting and thinking, what can I do? How can I resolve this? Is there what are the resources out there that parents can go to?
Well, I
Have some.
I think we're fortunately in a time in the global space where knowledge is everywhere. Just reading about parenting can expand your mind a lot. Yes, it's nice to get experience, it's nice to, but at times it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's just understanding, are there other ideas that can be used that are helpful. So reading, I think, is a thing that people could do. Look for resources online around parenting, around positive parenting. Read around it, look at it in your context, how you can apply it. Think around your culture, people who have raised kids successfully. You could engage them. There could be a tip or two that you pick that could be useful to you. Speak with a mental health expert, or a pediatrician, that has had quite some experience with. You could get some tips also. I think it's about just adding a piece on as you go along and improving. And once we're doing that, hopefully, things can get better. You can get better, as a parent. So I think using all these resources can all add up to equipping and helping you improve, or giving you suggestions around what you could do better. Don't just stick with your gut feeling that, okay, I feel this is what I should do and I'm going to do it this way. Read, do some research, speak to people, and then you use that to refine how and what your own approach will be.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We've come to the end of the session, and we're so grateful for all the knowledge and expanding this very, I would say, can be challenging topic, because people have come all grown up with their fixed ideas. People have lived from how they were parented as young years and carry that forward. And then people have faced challenges because there's no rule book for every child. So I think you've given us really good information, which I'm sure the audience would benefit from, about how to get it right, not too little, not too much, and also learning from others. But one key thing I would like our audience to take home today is that nobody has the perfect answer, but be involved in some form of community where you are, learn from those who've done it well, engage, be open. If you're having challenges, talk to other people and form bonds and friendships and positive ones that can help you. And Dr. Oshodi has clearly stated resources, and we're so thankful. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Oshodi.
you. Thank you very much.
Been a very enlightening session. And for would-be parents, I would also recommend that you listen to this, because it's about getting it right and building the blocks for future. It's the future that which we can't see now, but it's building the blocks. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for this session, and we wish you the very best in your work and all the great work you're doing. Mentoring young people, being a marriage counselor. I'm sure part of that will touch on things like parenting in the future. So thank you so much on your passion in this area, and hopefully we will have you back to talk to us again in the near future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to really appreciate you also for the great work you're doing in bringing these very important conversations to the fore, and by extension, promoting child and adolescent mental health. Thank you so much. You are an inspiration, and well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As we always say, early intervention leads to better outcome, and early intervention can only be achieved by early diagnosis. So thank you for listening into the series today. I know some of the things we've talked about today would probably have generated some questions or need to seek clarification. So I'm happy to take questions, and I'll invite you to send your questions to eim@drtakon.com. Thank you for listening in.